Hello, all. I am so excited for today. We have Matt Lowry with us. So I don't want to waste any time. I am going to turn this over to Matt. Um, he is like a celebrity at our office. Everybody talks about how amazing he is. And honestly, when people ask me about like how to better understand autism or themselves, I send them over to his meme gallery because I just feel like that is such a great introduction of just like a joyful expression of understanding of our brains. So thank you so much for being here, Matt.
My pleasure. Yeah, I'm glad you like it because that we are a meme-oriented people, and I dare say that the autistic people invented modern memery, but we will get into that in just a bit. So for right now, we will go from the beginning on here, and let me make this full screen. And so basically, hi, I'm Matt. My degrees are I've an MS, EDS, and an LPP. I'm a licensed psychological practitioner. I've got 2 decades of experience working with autistic people, and I'm autistic myself. I'm autistic. My son is autistic, and this is why I am an advocate because for many, many years, I kept myself in the neuro closet because it was safer that way. I worked with a lot of autistic people, especially a lot of autistic kids, and they all knew that I was autistic. But I realized when my son started showing the same traits that I had, that I needed to make the world a safer place for him. And that is why I'm doing what I'm doing. That is why I'm here now. This is why I talk about all the things that make us autistic people and that we have a culture. We are not disordered. We'll talk about all this kind of stuff. So this is intended to show you a celebration of autistic traits, a celebration of the autistic people, and how you can find autistic people in your workplace and probably in your family. So today's goals: increase your knowledge base, learn a new perspective about autistic people, challenge biases, use neurodiversity affirming language to describe autistic persons, help us educate our community, and make the world a better place. So let's get started with what autism is not. A lot of people mistakenly believe that autism is an intellectual disability. It is not. Autistic people can have intellectual disabilities. We can have average intelligence, and a lot of us have above average intelligence. There is one article that was published a while back citing autism as, quote, a disorder of high intelligence because of the way our brains are wired. But we'll talk about that in a minute. It is not a developmental disability. It is a developmental difference because of the way our brains develop. It is not a lack of empathy or compassion. As a matter of fact, a lot of us have hyper empathy, which can be debilitating. It is not a lack of theory of mind. That is a mistaken belief due to what we call the double empathy problem, and we'll talk about that more in a bit. It is not a mutation, defect, or mistake. It is actually genetic, and recent studies have shown that there's a 94% heritability rate of autism, which means that you can trace it all the way up the family tree to the beginning. Our people have been autistic since the beginning of time and will likely be autistic until the end of time unless autism speaks has their way. But we'll get into all these in just a moment. So, years and years ago, they wanted to figure out what autism is. And the theory was that we have teeny tiny little psychopath brains and they wanted to see them. This is an image of an autistic neuron under a microscope. And as you can see, we tend to have more dendrites and we have way more synapses. Each of these little dots is a connection with another neuron. And one of the reasons for this is that we tend to hyperconnect anyway, but also allistic non-autistic brains tend to go through a thing called synaptic pruning, a thing called autophage, where they emit a chemical in their brain that dissolves synapses and dissolves neural pathways that are not being used, in theory, for the sake of efficiency. Uh, During puberty, they weed out half of all connections, never to get them back. On the other hand, we autistic people don't do that. We are hyperconnected from birth and we stay hyperconnected. And that means that this is the difference between an autistic adult brain and an autistic neurotypical brain. This is a high definition fiber tracking software scan that shows the oxygen use in the brain. And again, because of synaptic pruning, neurotypical people tend to weed out extraneous connections. So all brains look very similar, hence the term typical. Also, neurotypical people, by definition, have an IQ between 90 and 110 because that's typical. You can be allistic and have an intellectual disability. You can be allistic and gifted, but neurotypical people have to have this very narrow band of experience because otherwise they wouldn't be neurotypical. In contrast, once again, autistic people can have intellectual disabilities, can be of average intelligence, can have very high intelligence. No two autistic brains are wired the same. You might be hyperconnected. You might be hyperconnected here or here or here or here or all the above. Uh, but no one knows where you will be hyperconnected. This is the reason that no two autistic people look alike. One person might be hyperverbal, another person might be apraxic. One common thing is that neurotypical people have a sensory bottleneck that tunes out 98% of all sensory data. We don't. That's why we get overwhelmed with the buzzing of lights and the noise outside. And right now I'm wearing nice cotton shorts because I don't like to wear, stiff pants. We also have hyper-connected, hyperdense amygdalae, which means that we are more prone to the fight, flight, fawn, freeze response. We are more prone to great big emotions, and we tend to be overwhelmed by a lot of the world. This is where the intense world theory comes in, because autistic people perceive the world as being in a constant sense of chaos that is overwhelming for us. We use a lot more energy just navigating that chaotic world than neurotypical people do, which is why we are often overextended, exhausted, and have a lot of other problems with this kind of stuff. But again, we'll go into specifics in just a moment. So once again, autism, some areas are vastly more connected, some areas less so. These connections correspond with changes in the body, changes in perception, and changes in communication. This is the reference for autism being genetic and the 94% heritability rate. If you want to check it out, it's there. But because of these differences, because of our perception, because of the family traits, we are a culture. And you're more than welcome to check out my podcast, the Autistic Culture Podcast, where we talk about famous autistic people, famous autistic traits, and things that make us who we are. And we take it as a very autism affirming thing. You're welcome to join us. Shameless plug. So autism is a dynamic disability, not a disorder. It's a disability from the social model of disability, meaning that if we lived in an autistic world where we all worked 3 days a week and we got to stay up really late and we had animals with us at all times, we'd be fine. We could, if the world worked around our needs, we would be set. But we live in a neurotypical world that expects us to do things constantly and it overwhelms us. But again, it's a dynamic disability that fluctuates based on our needs, based on how stressed we are, based on how overloaded we are in our environment. And all of these factors go into whether or not we can complete tasks on a daily basis. So this means that we really, really need to look at updating the DSM because while technically correct, it doesn't really explain us well. So I propose that the DSM change to autism spectrum neurotype as differences instead of deficits. The current model says deficits in social emotional reciprocity, abnormal social approach, failure of normal back and forth conversation. So pathologizing. So I say we have differences in communications. We go off in tangents. We talk passionately about our special interests, and we don't do small talk. Small talk is essentially a neurotypical captcha test because they say, "Hi, how are you feeling?" And the correct answer is, "I'm fine." "How are you feeling?" And the correct answer is, "I'm also fine." You're not supposed to go into any detail. You're not supposed to talk about yourself. It's nonsense. It's meaningless. It's just to see if you're human. Uh, Current model says deficits in nonverbal communicative behaviors for social interaction instead of differences. We move differently, which we'll talk about when we get to the proprioceptive stuff. We speak differently when we get to the accents. We'll talk more about that. Deficits in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. We have different relationships. Our relationships are based on common goals, special interests, and not based on like random associations with sports teams or schools or all that kind of stuff. And we were talking earlier about how at Comic-Con, we are very, very social people because we're all there to celebrate the things that give us autistic joy. And we are incredibly social under the right circumstances. Actually, one thing that just came up and then I forgot to put in here is that recent research shows that we are actually more social than neurotypical people because we are incredibly passionate while socializing. And that's something I wish I'd put in, but we'll include it in the next time. So there's a lot of misinformation given to parents of autistic children, like if your child does not speak by the age of 5, they will never speak. No, my son didn't start speaking until he was 6. He's 7 now. By the time most kids reach 9 or 10, they're fully fluent. Your child is autistic because he does not play. No, we play the way that we play. We might line up stuff. We might like trains. Autistic play is valid. Your child will outgrow autism. I haven't. There's a lot of belief that because we're able to camouflage, we've outgrown the autism, but a 4-year-old is going to have fewer coping skills than an adult. A person with intellectual disabilities will have fewer coping skills than an adult. Just because we're able to hide who we are doesn't mean we're any less that. Uh, yeah, it's insane to think about that. Your child is high, low, mild functioning on the autism spectrum. No, you're either autistic or you're not. You have high support needs. You might be overwhelmed by your environment. You might need a lot of help, or you don't. And that is how things work. Uh, and the whole thing about autistic speech, we live in a world that believes that speech is inherently related to intelligence. And that's just not true. There are several non-speakers who use AAC devices, and they're brilliant, brilliant thinkers. It's just that the connection between the brain, our brains move at the speed of light, and we have to communicate with floppy pieces of meat in our mouth. And sometimes that just doesn't work. And of course, the belief that we have lower intelligence because we are different. And that's just an ableist construct that we will get into in a bit. So what is the autism spectrum? It's not the amount of autism you have. And this is my proposed multidimensional model based on the autistic experience. So we are going to talk about all of these areas in more detail. Stimming, exteroception, proprioception, interoception, emotional intensity, communication differences, relationship differences, executive functioning, and special interests. And the first of these is stimming. Stimming is neurological self-regulatory behavior like chewing, tapping, finger twisting, hand rubbing, playing with hair, eating noises, TV, movies, podcasts, and even sex. Anything that you can get sensory data out of is stimming. I like to play with my Stimmerald, a 400 carat lab grown emerald that I got off of Etsy for $70 because it's nice and smooth and it's flat and it makes no noise and it's very, very fun to play with. But every creature on Earth stims, we just do it more than others. So these are the types of sensory perception. The whole thing is called neuroception. Neuroception is the culmination of all these, and it's essentially spidey sense that sets something off when there's something in one of these areas that go off. Interoception is your inside state. Proprioception is your awareness of your body and in space and time. Exteroception is all the outside senses. And because we constantly have warnings from one or more of these areas, we're constantly on edge, and this leads to a lot of autistic anxiety. This means that the world is overwhelming and chaotic because there's always data pouring in. We therefore have a need for order and a need to control this chaos. So sensory intensity, the outside senses, our bodies are very, very sensitive to the world around us. And genetically speaking, this runs in families. You might have intense allergies. You might have intense issues with light or sound or textures. You might not be able to eat food because it doesn't feel right in your mouth. And sometimes we really, really hyper focus on these things. Sometimes we're just so burned out, we can't pay attention to it at all. I remember a time when I was burned out, I couldn't feel temperature for a while because I was just so numb. And a lot of people who think that we don't feel things, the burnout is real. So anyway, exteroception is the senses associated with our external world. Complex noises are very distracting. We might not be able to handle multiple conversations at once. We might need subtitles when we watch movies or TV shows. It's very helpful to have that multiple avenue of input for us because we get overwhelmed and have trouble sorting it all out. We might get overwhelmed with strong smells or tastes, or bright sunlight, itchy clothing, textures of food. And again, to outsiders, this looks like distraction because a kid might be overwhelmed in a classroom and just zoning out when they're having trouble sorting out all of the data they're taking in. So proprioception is body awareness. Senses associated with the position of the body, movement, and equilibrium. This can include dystonia, dyspraxia. This can include dyscalculia, because dyscalculia also has a difficulty in knowing left from right, telling how far away things are, how big things are at a distance. Dystonia is affected by our connective tissue, because a lot of people have T-Rex arms, because it's a lot easier to hold this position if you have connective tissue issues like with EDS or I mean, a lot of us have this kind of stuff, but we'll get into that in a minute. But we like to dance, we like to move, walk on tiptoes, the side of our feet, we might spin. And this is what we call vestibular stimming, anything that activates your inner ear. And there's a lot of people who pace, there's a lot of people who move around, and a lot of kids really, really need movement breaks during the day because we have movement hunger. Interoception is the signals from inside of our body, our internal sense of homeostasis. And this can include feeling hungry, thirsty, full, sleepy, or needing to go to the bathroom. This might lead to difficulty in potty training. Adults might put off going to the bathroom for 8 hours because they say, well, I got to get this done first. And our cognitive needs outweigh our biological needs. We might not pay attention to what we're feeling because a lot of people have difficulty being aware of this kind of stuff. For instance, there's a diagram down here about how most people feel emotions as physical sensations throughout the body, as a sense of hot and cold. We, on the other hand, tend to feel headaches, chest pains, and stomach aches. This can lead to a lot of IBS issues. It can lead to a lot of diarrhea when anxious. And I use the gummy bear metaphor because let's say that neurotypical people, a green gummy bear is hunger, a red gummy bear is sadness, a blue gummy bear is, I don't know, chest pain. But our senses are essentially the bag of gummy bears being left on a dashboard on a hot day, and it just melts them all into one big amorphous glob of gummy. And when we try to chew through that giant glob of gummy, it's overwhelming for us. And we have a very difficult time picking apart the sensations and dealing with them as they need, instead of just dealing with them all at once when they finally hit us as a big blob. We also tend to have difficulty sleeping because we forget to breathe. We have a lot of non-obstructive sleep apnea, and I recommend every autistic person get evaluated for that because a lack of sleep can only make all of this stuff worse. This is a big thing for kids because a lot of kids have difficulty sleeping, but again, it's not a noted thing in the classroom. They just might get grumpy or irritable or fall asleep out of nowhere, and the teachers blame the kids for being bored. Adults need sleep. Adults prizing themselves on getting 3 to 4 hours of sleep a night, you know who you are. That's going to be a thing that really gets you in the long run. But that all leads to burnout. And autistic burnout is a killer. We have an average life expectancy of 36 due to all these factors. And due to like the mashed up gummy bears, a lot of adults turn to substance abuse in order to escape the overwhelming emotions. A lot of autistic people are very depressed. A lot of autistic people are socially isolated because people don't understand this intensity. And again, 36 is a very short lifespan, but we'll talk more about that in a moment. So again, emotional intensity, big feelings, shutdowns and meltdowns, and kids may hold them in after school, which is a big reason why I no longer seek out input from teachers, because teachers inevitably say, oh yeah, Sally was a great child and never speaks up and never says anything and just has this very strict body posture and just looks like a deer in the headlights all the time. She's fine. But you might break down after you get home to a safe space. And this emotional intensity is commonly misdiagnosed as bipolar, BPD, ODD, especially in people who are not white. Because again, autism is considered to be a white boy disorder, not a disorder for girls or non-binary or trans people or people of color. So people of color are often diagnosed with nonverbal learning disability and oppositional defiant disorder. And if you're told that your feelings don't matter and you become numb, it can appear schizotypal. We also don't talk about autistic euphoria because just like big negative emotions, we have big positive emotions. I was extraordinarily happy when I got this gem and when I got my lightsabers and all the cool stuff behind me. But again, outsiders don't understand that level of joy, and it's pathologized as being a manic episode, even though it's directly related to a life event. Oh, holistics. But so autistic communication. Uh, it's pathologized because we go with a Western model of communication techniques that's based on eye contact. As you can see, Satoshi Tajiri created Pokemon. He's autistic, and he decided that every time two people make eye contact, they must fight because he does not like making eye contact. But again, that's socially acceptable in Japan, whereas in our culture, eye contact is a must. It's actually an anomaly. Most places in the world don't value eye contact like that. It's often seen as aggressive. But anyway, aside from the lack of eye contact, we tend to have an accent that is called monotone, disjointed, pedantic speech with tangential conversation and difficulty modulating as we speak. Uh, for instance, if I'm to use my neurotypical accent, my voice will go up and down, and I'll pause at commas and at periods because it makes people more comfortable. But when I talk autistically, I talk kind of flat and I talk kind of fast and I get a whole bunch of stuff out at one time because I have a whole bunch of stuff to say because my brain is moving at the speed of light and I'm communicating with a floppy piece of meat in my mouth and I just say a whole bunch of stuff until I forget to breathe. And then this words. And other times I'm incredibly eloquent because I've got a great vocabulary. But if you pay attention to taking breaths in the middle of a sentence, that's a common thing for us because, again, it's a disconnection from our bodies. Most people will wait until the end of a sentence to breathe, but we'll stop and take a breath in the middle of a sentence. We also use a lot of echolalia, where we repeat words, sounds, phrases, and accents. Palilalia, where we'll say the same thing over and over and over again because it's just fun, and echopraxia, where we accidentally mimic other people. If someone scratches their head, we'll scratch our head. The biggest and most well-known example of this is if someone yawns, other people will yawn. And all this stuff is due to hyperconnected mirror neurons in our brain. And because of that, this is a form of autistic socialization with these mirror neurons. We bond with people, and that's how we do it. We also do a lot of scripting because we might say, well, I have an important thing to say later today, and I need to say this, and I need to say this, and I need to say this. And if they say this, I'll say this. If they say this, I'll say this. And we tend to plan out our interactions like that to alleviate anxiety. We also love talking about our special interests. And one thing that really puzzles Allistics is that we are very egalitarian in our communication style. For instance, I just encourage people to call me Matt because yes, I have a lot of degrees, but Matt is my name. Allistic people tend to be incredibly focused on hierarchies and get very, very upset if hierarchies are not followed. And this tends to be a problem for autistic kids in the classroom who will treat a teacher like a peer or a principal like a peer. And instead of saying, yes, teacher, yes, miss and mister, and yes, principal. And this ends up with problems with cops because cops love that hierarchy, especially for people of color who are autistic, having trouble with people who love hierarchy. There was a one training that I went to where the allistic woman talking about this was saying that she did this evaluation with a girl and she was horrified by this girl's quote lack of natural fear of adults. And I find that a bizarre thing because I can't imagine wanting children to fear me. But again, that's how neurotypicals see respect. And because of that, that's where we run into an issue with like the legal system and with healthcare, because if if we don't treat allistics with authority, they don't treat us with humanity. And this leads to a lot of early death for us. And that's a major, major problem. This is something that needs to be addressed. And if you're looking to make your practice a more neurodivergent friendly place, you really, really need to assess how much you enforce that hierarchy instead of treating people as humans. So this is a very long text, but fortunately, you'll be able to pause this and check it out. It's about how autistic communication is effective communication. There's this belief that allistic communication is somehow better, which leads to things like Cassandra syndrome, blaming all of the flaws in a relationship on the autistic partner. But studies have shown that cross neurotype communication is the tricky one, where allistics communicate with allistics well, autistics communicate with autistics well. But again, there's this gap because there's this cultural barrier that prevents people from understanding each other, and both parties have to work on it. But this leads to relationship differences because we have special interests, which we'll talk about more in a bit. We have a lot of rejection sensitivity and a lot of masking because we have lived a life where people look at us and treat us as though we're from the uncanny valley and that we're sort of people, but not full people. And we have to learn to hide ourselves to protect us from judgment. And this leads to a lot of trauma called internalized ableism, where we blame ourselves for being weird and unsuccessful. And Sylvester Stallone's son is autistic and arranged for this robot to meet him. And his son loved the robot so much that the robot is now in Rocky 3. But again, if the heritability rate is 94%, does that mean that Sylvester Stallone is also autistic? But anyway, so this all leads to executive functioning differences. We have what we call expectation sensitivity. Because the world is in constant state of chaos for us, we need to plan out everything ahead of time. Like if we're going to a restaurant, we need to know where to park, how many people are going to be there, what we're going to get to eat, what the menu looks like when we're going to leave, how we're going to get out. All of that will cause anxiety for us if we don't have a plan of action. We have issues with process complexity, meaning that we are very detail-oriented, monotropic people. We are very, very focused on these details, and sometimes the details are overwhelming. Like if an allistic person has to clean the kitchen, that's just one task. An autistic person looks at that and says, I've got to put the dishes away, reload the dishwasher, run the dishwasher, sweep the floor, wipe the counters, put the chairs away. Oh my God, that's so many things. And that can cause us to shut down. We have noise complexity, which is again being overloaded in an environment and we just can't hear our own thoughts. We can't concentrate. We shut down. Again, the monotropism, we are very, very laser focused at times. And sometimes when we're engrossed in our activities, we literally cannot experience the world around us because we are in a flow state. We'll talk about that in a second. And of course, all this leads to an autistic inertia, where a body at rest stays at rest and a body in motion stays in motion. When we are in this state of freeze, we are plotting out all of the steps, all of the paths, all of the processes that we need to do. But when we kick over into the action mode, we can't deviate from that course. We can't change tasks because that causes our brains to freak out. And research has shown that when a person is stuck in a state of autistic inertia, we need outside help. We need body doubling. We need outside assistance to get us unstuck. So this leads us to autism does not need treatment. The comorbidities do, because we are we are people, we are a culture, we love our stuff. Our special interests are a flow state. Pioneered by Csikszentmihalyi, the state of flow is how people can enter a state of Zen. Our brains switch over from alpha waves to theta waves, and we are meditating by playing Pokemon or organizing cards or involved in our favorite shows. This brings us joy. That does not need to be fixed. But we do have a lot of other health issues that people might not know about. For instance, all of these are more common for autistic people: allergies, asthma, psoriasis, eczema, sleep disorders, sleep apnea, chronic pain, chronic lethargy, fibromyalgia, dysautonomia and autoimmune disorders, MCAS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, 13 types of that, POTS, Hashimoto's, PCOS, and a lot of others. Uh, the genetic correlation, the genetic component that makes our brains autistic, makes our bodies hypersensitive to our environment. We have elevated mast cell reactions for allergies and asthma and all of this other stuff. We have elevated autoimmune responses. We're more likely to be stressed out and have high levels of cortisol that rip our bodies apart. These are the issues that need to be treated. And I guarantee you, every autistic person you see has at least one of these things that they need to work on. We also need specialized services like autistic affirming SLPs, OTs, PTs, understanding teachers, case managers, autism affirming therapists, and autism affirming medical providers. We need autism affirming care, because once again, if we go into a doctor who we tend not to treat as an authority figure and say, oh yes, I've done the research and I think I have POTS, a common response is for a doctor to say, well, POTS is so rare, I don't think that you have it, when it happens a lot more than you think. And these are the things that prolong our lives. A friend of mine died over Christmas break because they went to the emergency room and the people on duty did not understand mast cell activation syndrome, gave this person some medication, and it caused a body-wide inflammation, oh man, anaphylaxis, and they died. And again, this is why we have a very short lifespan. We need more understanding. So we also have anxiety and depression from living in a world that misunderstands us. A lot of us have complex post-traumatic stress syndrome to the point where holistic professionals have difficulty in picking apart what's CPTSD and what's autism, because so many of us are traumatized by our environment. Studies have shown that 9 out of 10 autistic women will be sexually abused before the age of 18. Autistic women are targeted by these people, by predators, because they know that autistic people are somehow different. And autistic people are taught, yes, you should definitely trust people, instead of following our natural instincts. Because of all this stuff, we're more likely to have substance abuse of all different kinds. And we're often have eating disorders due to interoception difficulties, sensory intensity, and process complexity, because we don't feel the need to eat. We don't feel full. We might only eat a certain type of food because everything else, we just can't put it in our face because it feels weird. And also, a lot of us are constantly overwhelmed and just don't have the energy at the end of the day to cook healthy meals. So you might stand over the sink eating a sandwich or a piece of cheese or a spoonful of peanut butter instead of cooking a healthy meal. All of these things are issues that we need to address on a systemic level instead of just treating it as a plain old eating disorder from an holistic perspective. A lot of autistic people also face gender dysphoria and misgendering, because autistic people are 6 times more likely than holistics to be LGBTQIA plus and 3 times more likely to be trans. And there's this thing called autogender, because we just perceive gender differently than holistics. Gender is a very multi-layered social construct in that women have long hair and wear dresses and they take care of babies. Men have short hair and have pickup trucks and drink beer and such. And we don't adhere to that. We do what we do, and social constructs are really stupid. No offense to any holistic person who loves their gender constructs, go for it. It's just not for us. But anyway, because of all this, we face discrimination in multiple areas, especially if you're a queer trans person, a queer trans person of color. You're not going to find as many job opportunities. You're going to be denied health care. You're going to be denied assistance when needed, and your quality of life is going to plummet. So why do we need to pay attention to intersectionality with social marginalization and ethical concerns around sex and gender, race, ethnicity, geography, language, culture, socioeconomic status, types and support needs, communication preferences, and age? Why? Because we're human. This is the only way to treat people with respect and dignity. Everybody is different. Everybody has strengths. Everybody has weaknesses. Everybody has needs. And to pathologize somebody, to ignore someone's traits based on any of these, is just flat out bigotry. You need to respect people where they are, who they are. And I don't know how to explain to people that you need to care about people who are different than you. But anyway, what are the fundamental problems with autism treatments? So let's start off with autism research. A lot of it is based on outdated information and conducted by neurotypical people. It does not consider the double empathy problem. It does not consider autistic burnout. It does not consider differences in neurology. It's very pathologizing and based on neurotypical social skills and autistic empathy. And it's focused on a cure because it's funded by ABA, which is a $1.8 billion a year industry, because fixing things is profitable, acceptance is free. So if you're an industry that's based on fear mongering and saying, ah, yes, you have to cure this, you're going to get services covered. Because of differences in neurology, neurotypical people tend to be instantly biased against us, and they want to make the autistic brain more neurotypical. They've done studies where they have videos of autistic people talking, and allistic people are instantly biased against us based on our body language, based on our accents, based on how we present ourselves. But when these same conversations are transcribed, they can't tell the difference between us. It's again, we fall into this uncanny valley that they know that we're different, but can't really identify how. So some examples of outdated autism research: Ivar Lovaas and Howard Goldstein. Check these out because it's all pathologized about communication and tantrums and just basically attributing all of our autistic traits to being subhuman. Again, they had studies where you have cross neurotype pairings that say cross neurotype pairings are less successful than intraneurotype pairings. And this related to the double empathy problem, meaning that the neurotypical people doing the studies did not have empathy for the autistic subjects, and they believed that the autistic subjects did not have empathy for them because they couldn't take their perspectives. And this cross neurotype perspective taking is where it's tricky because it has to go both ways. We have to understand neurotypicals for survival. They don't have to understand us because we're a minority. And that's where the discrimination comes from. But again, focus on a cure. 1.8 billion market in the USA. ABA traumatizes autistics. And there's very little research on how to improve the quality of life for autistic people because all of ABA is based on trying to make us not autistic. Ivar Lovaas was a big enthusiast of electric shocks, which is still used at the Judge Rotenberg Center to this day, even though multiple injunctions have been placed. But again, because we're not human, they don't care. And ABA people to this day still say, oh, I care very much about my autistic kids. I just also want to make them work 30 or 40 hours a week and develop social skills, when studies have shown that over time, autistic kids will naturally develop these social skills because a 10-year-old has better coping strategies than a 4-year-old, just as a 43-year-old has better coping strategies than a 13-year-old. This is how people grow. So according to the CDC, 1 in 44 children and 2.21% of adults are autistic, but that doesn't take into account the missing generations of autistics. Because again, if the heritability rate is 98 or 94%, autistic kids have autistic parents who have autistic parents. So there are tons of autistic people out there that have not been found. I wish I had the article. I read somewhere that it's estimated that 20% of the population is autistic. I wish I had that statistic. Unfortunately, I don't. But I mean, it's realistic considering how many kids I have come in for an evaluation, and then it turns out that the family is also autistic. Studies showed that negative labeling, because again, if you say, oh, yes, you're autistic, you're going to do stuff this way, that's a good label. But if you say, oh, you're inattentive, you're lazy, you're bad, that can cause a negative spiral for a kid through a lifetime. Very few studies have been done about AAC, non-speaking autistic adults. And because of that, a lot of the identified autistic college graduates are unemployed or underemployed. That doesn't take into account the unidentified autistic people who are masking like crazy and on their way to burnout. Because again, I didn't come out of the neuro closet for years and work in the community mental health sector. I was still autistic. I just didn't publicly identify as such. So you as professionals need to be mindful of ableism. Ableism says that because I'm an holistic person, I'm better than an autistic person. It's like saying because you have working legs, you're better than a person in a wheelchair. So don't presume that we autistic people can't do things for ourselves. Don't speak for people, don't speak on our behalfs. Ask us. Don't speak on behalf of people who don't verbally speak. Offer an AAC device. Don't assume that we're unhappy and want to be fixed. Don't assume that we are failures. We are failed neurotypical people. We are proud autistics. So we need to do this in order to increase the quality of life for autistic people and to honor our people as contributing members of society. So ableism, keep an eye out because again, I am an autistic person. Just like a person from Canada doesn't say I'm a person with Canada. They say I'm a Canadian person because they're proud of that. I'm proud of being an autistic person. I cannot be a person with autism because I will never be without that autism. It's baked into my DNA. And when you start to reconsider it as, again, an ethnic group, a heritage, a tradition, a culture, then you can see why we take pride in being autistic. We don't need to change our behaviors to fit into neurotypical norms. We we might need some accommodations. Don't expect us to do things that neurotypical people do. We will do some things a lot better. We will do some things a lot worse. It depends on the person. Uh, for the love of God, do not use seclusion and restraint because understanding autistic kids is the way to get kids to be successful. If a kid trusts you, they will follow your lead. If a kid knows that you care about them, they will do everything they can to live up to your hopes and expectations. But if they know that you're going to get mad at them and have a dude wrestle them to the ground and put them in a padded room, that's where a lot of these quote behavior issues come out. Because do you want to be wrestled to the ground? I mean, it's incredibly ableist to say that that's a fit for anyone. And stop using rewards and punishment to make people conform, just to make it easier for the teacher. That's just not what we need. So anyway, if you want some additional resources, I have a group for autistic people and autistic professionals called Autistic Connections. We have members worldwide, and we can link people with just about any service that they need. We also share a lot of memes because that's the way. We have a POTS and dysautonomia group. We have a homeschool group, and this is a link to the podcast. I wish I had a shorter link, but it's available on Spotify, Apple, we're even on YouTube. So just search for the Autistic Culture Podcast and you'll find us. So with that, do we have questions today?
I have a question. Everything that you've been saying has just resonated because I swear, everything you said just validated an entire session I had earlier today with a client. The piece that
Cheers.
I struggle with is, so this person has a lot of complex health issues, many of those on that list.
Of
And
course.
is in the process, and so of course and then there's a lot of trauma, right? And that's been there for various pieces. And so the kind of conundrum is, they are well aware that if they don't speak to those providers in a certain way, then they get certain responses. But they also just have a communication style. This person has both ADHD and is autistic. And so, as is common, and so they feel just kind of naturally the need to share all of the information
Oh yeah.
and to get everything. And so, how does one best go about that, right? Because if they don't follow what is expected of them, then they're not getting their needs met. But if they the alternative is to mask, which creates
Yeah.
its own set of problems and symptoms. And so do you have any like thoughts or suggestions on how to navigate that, all of the realities with their personal needs in the best possible way?
In a perfect world, we would have autism affirming providers that know this kind of stuff, but
I
I'm
wish.
well aware that the medical industry is ridiculously ableist. So I recommend people have a neurotype translator, like a case manager, to come to an appointment with them to help speak on their behalf and to be be a comfort person for the medical professional, because we have to treat allistics with fragile gloves in cases like this, and we have to unfortunately get those needs met in order to be treated as human.
Mhm.
And if you have someone who's able to translate for you, it will reduce the need for masking, it will reduce the drain on you. But again, if you don't have anybody, that's a commonplace for a lot of autistic people where they're coming from. And understanding that going to a doctor is unfortunately a lot like being pulled over by a cop. Uh, if, if
Yeah.
if you're not aware that they have an inherent bias against us, especially if you're an autistic person of color, especially if you're an autistic female person of color, good God. Yeah, it's very, very tricky, because you need to find good providers. If you can change providers to find a more effective provider, please do. But I know that all of these are limited to often the most privileged of people, and
Mhm.
that's the shame of it all. But yeah, I
Mhm.
don't recommend masking, but I do
Mhm.
recommend being aware of the danger that can come from a bigoted neurotypical person just denying us services that we need.
Mhm.
So Matt, we're getting quite a few questions in the chat.
Oh,
I don't know if you'd
what do we
like to
got?
for them or if you want me to summarize for you.
Summarize for me. Lay them on me.
Okay, well, one of them is that we're getting an ask for a lot of your links. So I will definitely try to get that all of that sent out as soon as possible. Another question that I have that I'm personally interested in as an autistic parent is what kinds of books, blogs, social media groups, or other resources do you know of to help us through that process?
That's why I created Autistic Connections, because there are a ton of autistic parents of autistic kids in there, and they get to share their experiences and talk about, this is difficult. How do I navigate this? We've got a homeschool group, because there's a lot of autistic parents who say, I went through a lot of crap as a kid, and I see my kid struggling with this same kind of stuff. How do we work around the system? So we've got that. And I don't know of any other really reliable things yet, because again, we're still in the ableist dark ages where kids are diagnosed. But again, a lot of professionals aren't saying, oh yeah, by the way, this is just like you and you're also autistic, when most people are.
Absolutely. I want to say that getting my kid assessed and diagnosed, the only thing that I went away with that we had similarities was we both have giant heads. Um, Zach runs Square Pegs, and Square Pegs has
Ooh,
specifically an autistic parenting group
oh
um,
nice.
that I've referred tons of families to, and then I'm a little nervous about going there myself. Um, New question from Ellie. How does one recover from autistic burnout, prevent
Ooh.
autistic burnout, and how long does recovery take?
Recovery can take months, if not years. I include with every report I write an extensive battery of resources for autistic burnout, and I can pass them along, because basically you have to reevaluate everything, because we live in a very colonialist, capitalist world that is based on productivity and fulfilling the needs of your superiors over your own needs. It's based on telling yourself that your biological, physiological, emotional, and cognitive needs don't matter, and that because of the whole interoceptive thing, we will work ourselves into the ground for the approval of our superiors. And you have to learn how to recalibrate that thing in your head so that you can trust yourself. and to meet your own needs and to set up healthy boundaries and to basically reevaluate everything that you do for yourself and other people. And you have to treat yourself better. You have to dive into your special interests. You have to make time for yourself. You have to learn how to relax. And I personally only work 4 days a week because I know my limits. And I love my job. I love talking to people about autism. I only see autistic people for therapy because I will be damned if I ever camouflage again. But then again, I'm also incredibly privileged in that I'm a white cisgender male, age 43. I'm not too young. I'm not too old yet. I'm in this very sweet spot where I can say anything I want at any time with very few consequences. And by God, I'm going to exploit the hell out of that. I am going to use my voice to amplify the voices of minority people. I am going to use that to defend people's rights wherever I can. And but at the same time, I'm going to take care of myself while doing so, because if I drop dead, then that's one less voice that we have. But speaking of boundaries, I actually have a session at 2 o'clock coming up. But it has been a pleasure to meet you all. And if you need anything, you know where to find me. I've got the website, I've got the podcast, and hopefully you all have found this entertaining and enjoyed it as much as I did.
Thank you so much, Matt. It is always a delight and a pleasure. And I just have so much love and admiration for you.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And I will see you all around.
Sounds lovely. Thank you.